Okay, so you're busy, right? You want to know what's important, cut through all the noise. That's what we're doing here on the deep dive. We take tons of info and we boil it down. What matters? What's the big takeaway? Today, we're looking at a really interesting question. What if peace processes, those attempts to stop conflict, what if they were run by victims? Not politicians, not the people who started the fighting, but the folks who actually lived through it. Could that work?
Yeah, it's a powerful idea, right? And we've got some pretty compelling material to dive into. We've got this document, like a formal proposal, and then a YouTube video that explores this whole victim-led peace concept. We're going to go through both, figure out what they're saying, and ask, could this be a whole new way to think about peace?
Totally. So first things first, the proposal itself started back on March 8th, 2025, got an update on March 10th, and it's addressed to, some pretty major players, the Shavariana universities, the Jesuits, even the Vatican, plus a bunch of other groups and organizations. This isn't just a casual suggestion.
And it's ambitious, that's for sure. The scope of what this proposal wants to achieve is huge. It's not just about, ending a war or stopping violence. This is about working together to create, actively build peace. Co-founding, co-inspiring, all these words, fraternity, love, religious unity, bringing different faiths together, even addressing the potential for chaos when resources start running out. It's like a total vision,
Yeah, a big picture view. And I don't know if you noticed this, but it started on International Women's Day, March 8th. The author makes a point of connecting that timing to ideas about equity, especially gender equity, and how that ties into peace and reconciliation. It's a call to action, not just words. And there's a strong emphasis on putting the ethics of Jesus, the Bible, the Vatican, really putting those into practice.
And you get the sense, reading through it, that there's this urgency, even some frustration. The author mentions that it's been 3 years since they first started putting out these proposals, and they're still waiting for, some real response, a chance to have a serious conversation about it. You can see why that would lead to this feeling of, we need to shake things up, try something new.
It's personal. You can feel that. The author, his name's Andres Alberto Buitrago Alasate Ramirez Gomez Garcia. He talks about feeling kind of exhausted. He's been trying to do this piecework on his own, doing all these ethnographic and neurolinguistic programming experiments. He even mentions role-playing, putting himself in the shoes of different social groups, trying to see things from all sides, but it hasn't, always worked out the way he hoped.
But here's the thing. He wants to change direction. He says he wants to focus on collaboration, doing research with others, especially at Javariana University, Cali.
Yeah.
He mentions their resources, their expertise. It's like he's saying, okay, maybe working together is the key. Maybe that's how we break through.
And it gets even more direct. He's actually talking about taking this to a whole other level. He wants to file new petitions, even a formal complaint, a PQR. And who is it addressed to? Jesus. It's pretty powerful imagery, right? He feels the people who are supposed to be following Jesus' teachings haven't taken these peace ideas seriously enough.
So it makes you think, right? What happens when the usual paths to peace don't seem to be working? This proposal is coming from that place, from that sense of we need a new approach.
And he wants to be scientific about it, too. He talks about proving that these actions, this victim-led approach, can actually lead to more peace in the world, using data, metrics. He mentions the Global Peace Index, that website, visionofhumanity.org. And he even suggests that maybe the index should include things like unmet desires, unmet needs. Maybe those are factors in conflict that we're not measuring right now.
Right. It's how do you measure something like unmet desires? But it points to something important. Maybe we're not looking at the whole picture when it comes to peace and conflict. Maybe there are deeper societal issues that we're missing.
Okay, so here's where things get interesting and potentially a little controversial. The document makes a big claim. It says organizations, groups that claim to be following Jesus' teachings, even those that give out, doctorates in peace, they're violating human rights. And it lists specific articles, UN articles, 27, 17, 1, 2, 18, 19, 23, and 26.
And the core of this argument seems to be about the right to petition. That's Article 23. And the Colombian Constitution has this right and duty to peace, Article 22. The author feels like because his proposals, his petitions, have been ignored, those rights are being violated. That's his argument.
And this leads us to the heart of the proposal. Peace processes, the author says, they should be led by victims, all kinds of victims, not politicians, not the people who started the violence. He traces this idea back to September 21st, 2014, International Day of Peace. That's when it clicked for him.
And what's interesting, what might challenge the way we usually think about this, is how broadly he defines victim. The document lists a lot of examples. victims of homicide, forced displacement, kidnapping, threats, political persecution. But also, this is interesting, bankers, prosecutors, judges, magistrates, people who've been slandered, libeled, harassed, the media, police, military, victims of landmines, terrorism, guerrillas, paramilitaries, drug trafficking, money laundering. There's a really long list. It makes you wonder, how do you bring all those voices together in a peace process?
Yeah, it's not just theoretical. He says he started formalizing this victim-led approach back in July 2022, submitted documents to the Colombian Congress, started pushing for working groups, formal recognition of this model. And these are groups and leaders who have never, taken up arms or coming at it from a different perspective.
And get this, he's reaching out internationally. He's working with the Bolivian military and police, specifically through this group called the Red de Militares y Policías Hispanos. They're looking at this Colombian peace process, seeing if it could work in other places. So he's thinking big, trying to spread this idea globally.
And the goal of all this, of these dialogues, is to actually achieve something concrete. Public policies, new laws, technology, research, even referendums, changes to the Constitution, agreements, and then reparations, legal action. It's about taking these discussions and turning them into real change in the world.
Okay, so now the proposal brings in the Vatican. The author argues that the Vatican has this, unique position. It can be a moral leader in the world, especially when things are so messed up globally, when the usual systems aren't working.
And he brings up Pope Francis. He talks about how Forbes ranks him as one of the most powerful people, but then he points out not a lot of Hispanics in those top spots. And that leads to a pretty big suggestion. Maybe we need a Hispanic pope.
It's not just about, representation for the sake of it. The document lays out some reasons. First, balance. Hispanics make up a huge part of the Catholic Church, so it makes sense to have someone from that background in a leadership role. Second, healing. He talks about spiritual decolonization, addressing the wounds of colonialism. That ties into some of the things Pope Francis has talked about, critiquing new colonialism and techno-feudalism. And third, preventing future conflicts. He suggests that someone who's from a place with a history of conflict, a place that's experienced fragility, they might have a deeper understanding of these issues, a better chance of preventing more violence.
The author's pretty clear about what he wants. He says the church shouldn't just become like an extension of Anglo-Saxon power, and when they choose a pope, they should prioritize science, religion, spirituality, ethics. And he wants policies to protect Hispanic territories from people coming in and taking their resources, privatizing everything.
This is an interesting point. The document mentions both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, two very different guys, right?
Yeah.
But they both talked about potentially reducing military spending. And he contrasts that with China, where the military budget's actually growing.
And that observation leads to a bigger idea. What if organizations, groups from different religions, different belief systems, what if they all got together and pushed for reduced military spending around the world? Like a global effort to take those resources and use them for something else.
Oh. Okay, now let's jump over to the YouTube video. It adds a whole other layer to this discussion. The video focuses on this term, PazyFrAm. It stands for Paz, Fraternidad y Amor, Peace, Fraternity, and Love. And there's been some debate, some controversy about what it means, especially this idea of dealing with criminals with love.
Yeah, the presenter addresses that head on. He makes it clear that PazyFrAm is all about victim-led peace. That's the core idea. Victims, not politicians, not perpetrators. And he introduces this really interesting concept, a scale of consciousness.
Yeah, this scale is fascinating. He says the original website that explained it is gone now, but he describes it. It basically has these different levels of awareness, starting with, he calls them demonic and animal, and then it goes up through emotional, rational, then love, then something called annihilation of ego, and finally illumination. You might be wondering, how does this apply to conflict?
Well, the presenter, his view is that people in terrorist groups, criminal groups, they're operating from these lower levels, demonic, animal, emotional. They're not acting from reason, from love.
And this ties into this idea that unmet needs, unmet desires, those are huge drivers of criminal behavior. It's like, if you don't have that basic foundation of love, that's where the violence comes from. He even suggested figures like Jesus, Buddha, they were operating at those higher levels, love and illumination.
What's really relevant here is that the presenter is out there. He's building networks of victims, and not just the victims we usually think of. He's working with people who see themselves as victims of prosecutors, judges, magistrates. He's even planning to do the same for victims of politicians, bankers. His goal is to make sure all these voices are represented in peace talks, in these dialogues.
He also talks about how complicated things are in conflict zones. Like, some people join armed groups not because they're bad people, but because they have no other options. There's no work, no opportunities. So they're victims too, victims of the system. It complicates things, right? It challenges our definitions.
Okay, so about that treating with love idea, there's been some pushback on that. The presenter clarifies it. He says, look, on this scale of consciousness, people at those lower levels, they might not even understand love. They can't reciprocate it. So he's not saying go hug a terrorist. It's more about understanding the roots of conflict, where it comes from.
Yeah, he seems worried about people misinterpreting PazyFrAm. He doesn't want people to think it's some naive political stance. It's more about understanding what drives conflict, like on a deeper level.
And then he circles back to the Global Peace Index. He says we should look for connections between these victim-led processes and the data from the index. Can we prove that this approach actually leads to more peace? And he suggests maybe the index should include those unmet needs, those unmet desires, like we were talking about before.
And the video goes into some detail about the index itself, all the different things it measures. Internal conflicts, external conflicts, deaths, relationships between countries, crime, displacement, political instability, human rights, terrorism, homicide rates, violent crime, protests, incarceration, police, military spending, arms imports and exports, UN peacekeeping. It's a lot.
The presenter even talks about his own experiences with displacement, how hard it is to measure something like that, to capture the reality of it. And then he suggests something pretty radical. What if we had an index for every single human right, to track how often they're being violated?
So taking all of this together, the proposal, the video, the big takeaway is this. We're running out of resources. Things are going to get more tense globally. We need to figure out how to build peace, and we need to do it now. And these victim-led processes, addressing the root causes of conflict, giving everyone a voice, that might be the way forward.
So we've reached the end of our deep dive, and we want to leave you with this question. What if peace processes were really driven by victims? All those different experiences, all those perspectives, could that work? Could that change things?
Think about it. What if we stopped focusing so much on the politicians, the people in power, and we really listened to the people who've been hurt, who've been affected by conflict? And what about this scale of consciousness idea? It's a different way of looking at things, but could it help us understand why conflict happens? Could it lead to new solutions?
We're all connected, right? There are these big systems, these structures that shape our lives. But there's also individual consciousness, our own choices, our own actions. And how do those things come together? How do they interact when we're talking about building peace? That's something to think about, something to take with you.